needed to use. Now, there are a lot of benefits to this way of working, and what it gives us really is a map of what it looks like to have a suitcase that bounds the language that the teacher needs to use. The teacher functions in three areas: using language knowledge to manage the context in the classroom, that's over here on the left; using language knowledge to convey the content, which is the national curriculum; and using language knowledge to connect the curriculum to what's going on in the classroom. That's assessing students and giving them feedback. So these three kind of functions, which group the tasks that I just showed you, allowed us then, with our colleagues, to generate language exemplars and to create a set of language that would undergird specific proficiency in the classroom. Now, please understand, I'm not arguing this is the only thing that a teacher could say. If you go back to those tasks, you can use many forms of language to call on students. I'm not even saying it's the best stuff that a teacher ought to use. I'm simply saying that by bounding it, we could say this is language that gets the job done. And if our goal was really to support teachers in becoming proficient in this context, that's really the only way we could do it, because general proficiency wouldn't get us there. It simply offered way too many options for what teachers needed to do, and it did not bound the situation in a way that corresponded to the work that needed to be done. So what we've ended up with then is a way of thinking differently about general language proficiency in the context of the classroom. By bounding it, by setting parameters, by identifying what it is, very much in an ESP approach, we've been able to say it's actually not about general proficiency, but about specific contextual proficiency, in this case, in the classroom. Okay, so let me recap what I've said as I wind up. I started with Annie and her comment that bingo is the only thing that works with kids. And as I argued earlier, that reasoning actually depends on the three myths that I've talked about. It shows us the myth of direct causality, or the pool shot, because what Annie was saying about bingo was it was a very packaged relationship between teaching and learning. It bounded it and defined it in very specific ways. Annie called out the numbers, the kids marked their cards. It also showed that Annie was really responsible in a way for what was happening in the classroom. Her moves drove the student moves. So she would call out B8, and the kids who had B8 would go, yeah, and they'd mark it, and the kids who didn't have it would moan, and the game would go on. But it made everybody have a role and know what they were supposed to do, which meant that really the students were working in a pretty bounded situation, a pretty small suitcase. All they had was the numbers and letters on the bingo card, and that's what they needed to work with, that's what they needed to learn and to understand and to know. And I suppose we could debate, and I'd be happy to do that, the horizontal value of simply knowing B8 without other language. But you get the point that really when Annie as a new teacher said to me, bingo is the only thing that works, she was actually reflecting reasons that are part of the fabric of teaching language in classrooms and schools. So if these are some of our myths, how can we think about them differently? Well, I think it helps actually to use a different metaphor altogether, which brings me to skateboarding. If you spend time watching people skateboard, you see that there's this relentlessness about it. It's actually fascinating. They just practice, if we want to use that word, again and again and again, on and on. And so there really is direct causality in what they do. It's very much connected to what the individual skateboarder is doing and how good he or she gets at it, how often she practices. It's also very much solely responsible activity. Only the skateboarder can do it. Can't do it for them. They have to do it themselves. And finally, it's very clearly bounded. You become proficient in one situation, sliding the board down the banister, and then you see, does it work on the street or does it work on the stairs? So the boundedness is what propels the proficiency of the activity. So you might be thinking, okay, I follow you so far. This gives me a sense of learning, but where's the teaching in it? That's what I think this metaphor is helpful for. It thaws our thinking by not taking teaching out of the picture. It's absolutely there, but making us think differently about what teaching is and might be, and what teachers might actually do. So one way of looking at skateboarding, to connect it with my argument, is that it presents opportunities, and those opportunities are opportunities that the learner uses to direct practice. And in practicing, as I said, relentlessly, the learner becomes more proficient, making judgments about that proficiency as he or she does it. So that really what we get here is a vision, as I said, of learning driven by the learner. And we know that teaching is part of it. The question is how. So the issue that I would ask you to engage with and think about is, we know teaching is central, but that doesn't mean we have to think about it in the same way. So if we reframe our myths in this way, then we really can look at learning from a slightly different point of view. And that's where I want to go to pull this together. As I said, I've been working with these colleagues to develop this idea of English for teaching. And one of the places that we've been able to work on this is in Vietnam. And we've worked with it with Vietnamese public sector teachers, as you can see in the map on the right, from pretty much all over the country. And what we wanted to do was to develop a way to support those teachers to teach English in their classrooms, using English as the medium of instruction, that would support them, as I said, by bitfalling the language clearly that they needed to organize.